Well, I saddled up my shoes, headed out at dawn.
New York City, 1935. A newsroom that smells of cigarette smoke and yesterday's coffee. Typewriters clatter like rain on a tin roof. Editors shout across the floor. Copy boys run between desks with the look of men who have somewhere to be and no time to get there. The phones ring and no one answers them fast enough. Somewhere a glass breaks. Somewhere a man laughs too loud. This is the sound of the news being made. Urgent, messy, alive, and in the back, past the noise. And the deadlines and the half-eaten sandwiches and the arguments about tomorrow's front page. A lanky young man named Jimmy Stewart is about to take his very first step onto the screen. That would define a generation. He was 27 years old. He had a small part. 6th billing. They called his character Shorty. If you have ever seen Jimmy Stewart, that is the first joke the movie makes, and it lands perfectly. But here is what nobody in that newsroom knew. In that hot summer of 1935, with the world still broken and the money still gone and the future still uncertain, nobody knew that the tall, awkward kid in the cheap suit, standing next to Spencer Tracy, was going to outlast almost every single person in that building. He was going to win an Academy Award. He was going to fly 20 combat missions over Germany. He was going to become the conscience of American cinema for 50 years. He was going to make people cry on Christmas Eve for generations, and it all started here. In a murder mystery, with a joke about his height. Here is the story. The Murder Man opened on July 12, 1935. America was 5 years deep into the Great Depression. People stood in bread lines that stretched around city blocks. Fathers sold apples on street corners in the cold. Families who had owned homes and businesses and a little piece of the future had watched all of it disappear in the space of a few years. The country was tired and hungry and frightened and looking for two things from the movies: escape and justice.mgm gave them both. The film starred Spencer Tracy, a man who had just signed a contract with the studio that would anchor him there for the next 20 years. He played Steve Gray, a newspaper reporter so gifted at covering homicide cases that his colleagues had given him a nickname. They called him the Murder Man. When there was a killing in New York City, Steve Gray was there first. He saw what the police saw, understood it faster, wrote it better, and had it on the street before the detectives had finished taking their notes. He was the best in the business. Everyone knew it. His editor knew it. The police knew it. The criminals, when they read his byline, knew it too. The only problem with Steve Gray? He drank. He disappeared for days at a time. He turned up on park benches and in places a man of his talent had no business being. His editor loved him and hated him in exactly equal measure, the way you feel about anyone who is genuinely brilliant and genuinely broken at the same time. A man who could do things no one else could do, and who seemed determined to use that gift to destroy himself as efficiently as possible. And this was also on the same set, in the same newsroom, breathing the same cigarette smoke. The movie where Jimmy Stewart showed up for the very first time. He was playing a reporter named Shorty. A small role, supporting. The kind of part a young actor takes when he needs to get his foot in the door and prove he can stand in front of a camera without flinching. And the irony of calling a man who stood 6 feet 3 inches tall Shorty is exactly the kind of joke that only works because Stewart played it completely straight. No wink. No smirk, no awareness of the joke. He just was Shorty. Earnest, eager, and completely, impossibly likable from the very first moment you see him. Now here is the story the movie tells, and it is a good one. A crooked investment broker named Halford is shot dead. The bullet comes from a rifle fired across the street, from a public shooting gallery, in broad daylight on a busy New York street. Not in a dark alley, not in the back of a speakeasy, on a regular street, in regular daylight, in front of regular people who saw nothing useful and heard only the noise of the city. The police are baffled. The detectives walk the block 3 times and come back with nothing. Steve Gray is not baffled. Steve Gray is never baffled. Within hours, he has a theory. Within a day, he has a suspect. The suspect is Henry Mander, Halford's business partner. Also crooked, also involved in a financial scheme that had taken the savings of ordinary working people and made them disappear into thin air. The kind of man who sat behind a mahogany desk and shook hands and smiled and explained in careful, reasonable language why your money was now gone and there was nothing to be done about it. The kind of man the law could never quite catch. Steve builds the case piece by piece. He does the work that the police should have done. He leads them to the evidence, explains what it means, and makes sure they understand every step. He testifies in court. His testimony is precise. It is devastating. It leaves no room for doubt. And Henry Mander is convicted of murder. He is sentenced to death. The story is closed. The case is solved. Steve Gray has the biggest scoop of his career. His name is above the fold on every front page in the city. His editor is delighted. The newsroom is celebrating. But Steve Gray cannot sleep. He cannot eat. He sits in his apartment in the dark and stares at a blank page in the typewriter and cannot write a single word. The cigarettes burn down to nothing. The glass stays full. The woman who loves him, Mary Shannon, the advice columnist at the paper, the one person who has stayed close through all the disappearances and the drinking and the long silences. She watches him coming apart, and she does not understand why. He solved the case. He got the story. The bad man is going to pay. Why is Steve Gray falling to pieces? And then Steve goes to find his father, Pop Gray, an old man living small, carrying something heavy behind his eyes. And in that visit, in the quiet of that small room, we begin to understand what this story is really about. The movie never tells you the truth directly. It lets you feel it first. It trusts you to understand. And that trust, that decision to show, rather than explain, is one of the things that makes this film remarkable for its time. Here is what Steve Gray has been carrying all along. Halford and Mander, those two crooked businessmen in their expensive suits and their reasonable voices, they had run a scheme that destroyed Steve's father. Pop Gray had worked his whole life. He had saved carefully, the way men of that generation saved, putting away a little at a time, building something for himself and for his family. And then Halford and Mander took it. Every dollar he had, gone. Not through bad luck, not through some accident of the market, through deliberate fraud, through lies told to a man who had no reason to doubt them. And there was a woman, Dorothy, Steve's former love. She had been entangled in Halford's world, used and discarded the way men like Halford used and discarded people who got too close. When Halford was finished with her, she had nothing left. No money, no future, no way back. She did not survive it. Steve Gray had spent years carrying those two losses. His ruined father, who never complained and never fully recovered. The woman who did not make it back. And the men who caused all of it, walking free in their expensive suits, shaking new hands, running new schemes, finding new people to destroy, never once looking back. So Steve Gray planned it, carefully, brilliantly, the way only a man who has spent an entire career inside murder investigations could plan something like this. He studied the angles. He found the moment. He killed Halford, and then, with the precision of someone who understood exactly how these investigations worked, he framed Henry Mander for the killing. Because Mander was guilty of plenty. And then he covered the story himself. He was the reporter and the killer, both at once. Investigating his own crime, writing the story he had already written in his head, leading the police exactly where he wanted them to go, step by careful step. It is one of the darkest, most audacious plot twists in 1930s American cinema. A man so consumed by grief and by a righteous rage that had been building for years, that he had become the very thing he had spent his career reporting on. And the person who brings him back, who finds Steve hiding, who reaches through the wall he has built around himself, and with nothing but simple, honest decency convinces him to go do one last interview, is Shorty Jimmy Stewart. 27 years old, playing a small role, showing up with nothing but warmth and that quiet, earnest persistence that would define his entire career. Spencer Tracy as the broken, brilliant, guilt-soaked man. Jimmy Stewart as the uncomplicated good. Two of the greatest careers in Hollywood history. In the same room, for the very first time. Now I want to stop here and tell you about a single, scene because in a film dominated by Spencer Tracy, one of the most powerful and instinctive screen presences who ever stood in front of a camera, a 27-year-old kid in a supporting role managed to steal a moment, and he did it by doing almost nothing at all. Steve Gray has disappeared. His editor wants him found. The whole newsroom is looking, and Shorty, long, goofy, entirely sincere, goes to a bar to ask if the bartender has seen him. The bartender says no. Shorty starts to leave. He gets halfway to the door, and then he stops. He turns back. He looks at the bartender with that slow, honest, searching Jimmy Stewart look. The one that makes you feel he is talking only to you, as if there is no camera, no audience, no room full of people. And he says, simply and sadly, "The guy's got me on a merry-go-round," and the camera cuts to a merry-go-round, where Spencer Tracy is asleep. It is a perfect moment, funny and sad and completely true, all at the same time. The humor does not diminish the sadness. The sadness does not cancel the humor. They sit together the way they only do in real life and in very good art. Stewart did not reach for it. He did not perform it. He just said it. The way a real person says something about someone they genuinely care about and genuinely cannot figure out. A rookie. In his first real film, standing next to one of the greatest actors alive. And he held his own, not by matching Tracy's intensity, but by being something Tracy could not be in that moment. Simple, warm, completely real. That one turn at the door. That one line. That is already the whole career. Shorty finds Steve. He brings him back, and Steve Gray goes to Sing Sing prison. He sits across from Henry Mander, the man he framed, and he listens. He listens to a man who is waiting to die for something he did not do. Mander is not innocent of everything. He ran the scheme. He took the money. He destroyed lives without a second thought. He is a guilty man in every sense that matters, but he did not pull that trigger. He did not fire that rifle from across the street on that ordinary New York afternoon. And Steve Gray knows it. And Steve Gray finds that he cannot let an innocent man, even a guilty man, even a man who deserves punishment for a dozen other things, die for his crime. So he dictates his final story into a recording device, in his own words, at his own measured pace. Because Steve Gray has always controlled the story. And this one, the last one, the one that will end him, will be no different. Mary Shannon sits down at the typewriter to transcribe it. The recording begins to play. Her hands move on the keys. And then they slow, and then they stop. She looks up from the page. Virginia Bruce, in that moment, does something quietly extraordinary. No tears, no screaming, no dramatic collapse. Just the slow, terrible, unavoidable dawning of understanding on the face of a woman who loved a man far more complicated than she ever fully knew. It is one of the most restrained and devastating reactions in 1930s American film. Steve Gray tells his editor the biggest story of his career, his own confession. He turns himself in. The innocent man is saved. The truth is told. Is it justice? Is it redemption? Is it simply a man who went too far, waited too long, and in the end found he could not carry the weight of it alone anymore? 1935 did not answer that question. It just asked it, and it left the answer with you, sitting in the dark of a theater on a summer night, in the middle of the Great Depression. The Murder Man is not a perfect film. The dialogue is dense, packed tight the way early sound films often were, still working out that silence could carry as much weight as words. Some of the newsroom scenes show their age. Some of the supporting performances belong firmly to their era in ways that remind you how much the craft changed in the years that followed. None of that is what matters about this movie. What matters is what it started. This was the film that placed Spencer Tracy at MGM, where he would stay for 20 years. Where he would make Captains Courageous and Boys Town and Judgment at Nuremberg and Inherit the Wind. Where he would become, alongside Katharine Hepburn, one of the great screen partnerships in the history of the art form. Without the Murder Man, that story starts somewhere else. Starts differently. Maybe doesn't happen at all. And this was the film where you can watch Jimmy Stewart discover in real time who he is going to be. He is not quite there yet. He is still finding his footing. Still a little too eager, a little too unpolished at the edges. But in that bar, in those 7 words to a bartender, You can already see the whole thing. The warmth, the timing, the sincerity that could never be faked or manufactured or taught to anyone who did not already carry it somewhere inside them from the beginning. 4 years later, Frank Capra would put that sincerity in front of the United States Senate in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and the whole country would recognize it immediately, as if they had always known it. 11 years later, he would put it on a bridge in Bedford Falls in a snowstorm, and the whole country would cry, all of that. Every single moment of it was already present in a 27-year-old kid turning back to a bartender in a black and white bar in a murder mystery that most people have never heard of. In 1935, Jimmy Stewart was Shorty, lanky and earnest and running errands in someone else's story. He never really changed. He just got a bigger stage. A film is sometimes more than a story. It is a mirror, reflecting an era, a generation, and the conscience of a man. The Murder Man showed us the sincerity Jimmy Stewart carried from the very beginning, before the world knew his name. Because some careers begin with an Oscar, some begin with a fight on the Senate floor, and some begin with a simple joke about being too tall, in a cheap suit. In the dusty light of a 1935 newsroom, Jimmy Stewart's journey began right there, and he never stopped being exactly what he was in that very first scene: honest, warm, and completely impossibly real. If this journey reminded you of something worth keeping, I invite you to become a part of our family. Subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. There are more stories coming, not just about films, but about the people and the moments that made something matter. Let's keep that rare, forgotten kindness alive together.